Kentucky for questions.
I would thank the chairman. This is an interesting bill for me. I've spent 12 years here trying to be consistent on this stuff, on sanctions, on international organizations that may be outside of our Constitution. And so I wasn't sure how I was going to vote on this bill. I don't vote on titles, and I kind of know I think I know the reason it's being brought up recently. But I've read the bill, and I've noticed some interesting things about it. So when I asked you, Mr. Self, about this, isn't it true that the bill does not mention Israel, Netanyahu, Gaza, or Hamas, or any specific country or person? It's just
it does not.
It does not even in a whereas clause, which I appreciate. Usually, a lot of times, the whereas clauses are the reason I vote against the bill, because it's whereas something that's not true, and now we're going to resolve this. But I didn't see, there's no whereas clause here, so I appreciate that. It doesn't target any specific country. Now, it does have categories of countries, like NATO allies or strong non-NATO members, strong allies, et cetera. The reason I scanned the bill to make sure it didn't have any anything like that in there is I don't want to condone what Israel's doing. I don't want to condone the way Netanyahu is waging the campaign against Hamas, because I think there are too many civilian casualties. 1% of the civilian population of Gaza is no longer breathing air, no longer on this planet. And we've just somehow accepted that level of civilian casualties, whether it's 2 civilians for every enemy combatant, is okay, which I do not accept. So I just wanted to make sure when I read this bill, even though I know the urgency for it, the reason it's coming up this week, obviously you've mentioned the context for that, is the common knowledge that ICC is going to target people that aren't within its jurisdiction. But I want to be clear, and this may be the only chance I get to speak on this bill, I do not condone the way Netanyahu or any of the generals in Israel are conducting this war. But I do support this bill because none of that's in there. Israel's not in there, Netanyahu's not in there, Gaza, Hamas, none of that is in there. It's written generally, which I think most bills should apply not just to specific actors, but in whole, you should say what you mean to do, and I think this bill does, which is, and I think it's a strong statement that we are not in the jurisdiction of the ICC, and a lot of our allies aren't either. It does have sanctions in it. Now, I've never voted to sanction another country. I've been here 12 years. I've never voted to sanction another country. But this bill doesn't sanction countries. It sanctions an institution which I don't believe we're under the jurisdiction of. It's a global institution that has members who aren't member countries, who aren't democratic, and we are not in the jurisdiction of this institution. So I think pushing back on it is a wise thing to do, not because of the special circumstance right now, but because we would never let President Biden be subjected to this court. We would never let President Obama, I mean, there were people who wanted him, not too many in this country, but there were people outside of this country who thought Obama was a war criminal for the drone strikes that were conducted on wedding parties. There are people who thought that George Bush was a war criminal. And we would never submit one of our leaders, and I notice this bill also covers members of Congress, we would also never submit one of this body to a global institution which we don't recognize as having jurisdiction over us. And even if this body voted to give this global institution jurisdiction over Americans, I would vote hell no on that. So,
The gentleman.
yeah, I'll yield to the
One
gentleman from
second.
Texas.
I just want to clarify for the record, because I just want to make sure we're accurate here. I certainly, statement against interest, I would certainly want your support of the bill. The legal language does not mention Israel. The findings do have some references to Israel and the Prime Minister. I just want to make sure that's clear for the record.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are those in a whereas clause, or?
They're in findings at the first place.
Okay.
First page. It might have been an older draft or whatever, but there are a couple findings, and the gentleman can look.
Well, maybe I'll vote against it.
Well, you might. I want the
there are
record to
six-
reflect the reality.
If I may.
Yes, please.
There are 6 references to Israel, 1 reference to Benjamin Netanyahu, 1 reference to Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, and it does go into detail strongly condemning investigations against those individuals in Israel.
So I may have been operating off an earlier draft, or just, but this still stands after the resolve clause. What's in the resolved portion of this is that once you get past the findings, it still stands that we're talking about all of our allies, and ourselves included, are not subject to jurisdiction of this. Now, to Mr. Crow's point, I do hope that anybody that takes a certain position today will take that position later when we start trying to say that other people are war criminals and that they should be subjected to the ICC. I am concerned that there may be a double standard here on both sides of the aisle. Yes, Mr. Crow.
Again, if I may, and I do appreciate your consistency on this issue, Mr. Massie, and even though I disagree with it, but you have been consistent, I will admit that. I think there's a really fundamental difference between having concerns over jurisdiction, which I do, actually. I have some jurisdictional concerns with the ICC in this case, the case that's under consideration in this bill, because it implies that there is a state of Palestine, and while I support a 2-state solution and a pathway to achieve that, we are not yet there. So there's a jurisdictional element there. And also, like I said in my opening statement, a long-time supporter of making sure we're defending our troops and not subjecting us unnecessarily to the jurisdiction of the ICC. So there's a difference between having concerns about jurisdiction, which I share, versus affirmatively reaching out and sanctioning this body. This body, which includes 30 of our NATO allies. Only the United States and Turkey are the only NATO countries that are not parties to and don't have legal obligations to the ICC. And then 6 other major non-NATO allies as well. So significant treaty obligations.
Are we in that list of people that aren't? You said there's 2 NATO allies,
right?
As well as us.
Of all of NATO, it's only the United States and
Okay.
Turkey who are not a party to the ICC.
And I hope we never are. Like I said, I would never want to subject a member of this body or a member of the executive branch of this country. As I think Mr. Self said, if we're going to lead, we should lead. And we should have good relations with every country. And we should conduct ourselves in a manner that sends a signal to the rest of the world that we're not tyrants. And when confronted with that, we'll go against it. But Mr. Self, did you have something to say?
I would. I'd like to address a couple of your points, Mr. Massey. The urban warfare is the most dangerous warfare for civilians. The casualties in Gaza have not been out of line with historic norms at all. In fact, they've been pretty good in terms of percentages. The problem I have with that statement is that the Biden administration just recently withheld a package of weapon systems. Now, they focused on the 2,000-pound bombs because that sounds big, and believe you me, they are. But there were 2,000-pound bombs or 500-pound bombs in there, but the one I want to focus on is the precision guidance add-ons that were also in that package, that they were going to strap on those bombs to make a dumb bomb a precision-guided weapon. So they held that up.
I want to give you as much time as you want, but that was a week before last bill. I mean, I mean, we were talking about withholding that, and you and I did vote differently on that bill, I think. But this week's bill, by the way, I did have the copy from 3 days ago and not tonight's copy.
I wanted to get the record.
Thank you.
Where do you get an actual copy?
So anyways,
And
that's my summary of this. I don't need to go on very long. I don't condone what Israel's doing. I think, you said these are acceptable ratios of civilian casualties to
I didn't say acceptable. I said historic norms.
historic norms. Well, if 1% of the U.S. civilian population were eliminated, that'd be 3.5 million people. That would be 1,000 9/11s. So I don't accept these numbers, even though historically there have been a lot of atrocities over historically. And I don't think we should be a party to that. And I think that what's going on right now in Gaza is too many civilians are dying. I understand that there's tit for tat, and if Hamas strikes Israel, Israel's going to strike back, but there are way too many innocent civilians dying. So now that I have the most recent copy of the bill, and there are findings in the newest copy, I need to see if I'm still going to vote for it.
If I may?
Yes, Mr.
Massie?
Crow.
Yeah, and first of all, to Mr. Self's point, I am personally and intimately familiar with the rigors of urban combat. I, in fact, fought as a paratrooper in the Battle of Asamoah in 2003 during the invasion of Iraq, and the Battle of Asamoah was the largest, most sustained urban combat that the 82nd Airborne Division was involved in since World War II. But I also have taken it upon myself to dive really deep into the details of this particular conflict from a policy perspective. And our government and other organizations have done very detailed analysis of the last 10 major urban conflicts, of which this is by far the worst. So I'd be happy to set up a briefing or more information to Mr. Self and others that show that this particular conflict in Gaza is significantly higher in terms of civilian deaths than the other comparable conflicts that we've seen in modern history.
Well, I appreciate your service in urban combat. I think it's, we probably had the munitions to level Iraq, but I mean, part of the reason when you engage in war with soldiers that you don't just level the civilian population is that when the whole thing is over, you're trying to engender their trust and set up some kind of sustainable society, and hopefully a society that doesn't hate your guts. And when you go in and indiscriminately, you can wage war with soldiers door to door, or you can do it with bombs. Regardless of how precise they are, these things have a radius of hundreds of feet, that they're a kill radius, lethal radius. Not everybody is guaranteed to be killed in that radius, but a lot of people are going to die in that radius. So even if we can deliver them within 5 feet in a city, you still have a radius of where you're going to decimate everything within 100 feet of that, and could kill people up to 600 feet away with the 2,000-pound bomb. So I think it's an unfortunate situation that we're in, and I'll just close. I know I promised to close before, but then I yielded time to Chip Roy, and my perspective changed. He usually does that. I'll just close by saying I don't condone what Israel's doing right now, but I do think that we and our allies are outside of the jurisdiction of this international global institution. And so I'm inclined to vote for the bill, and I yield back.